for that, Jessica Le Mesurier in the newsroom. Egypt is picking up the pieces after its worst day of violence in more than a year. At least 55 killed at a Monday protest outside the barracks where ousted President Mohamed Morsi is believed to be held. The Muslim Brotherhood politically beaten after the destitution of Egypt's first democratically elected civilian president. But the faithful still turning out in force this Tuesday to protest. These are images you saw there of evening prayer. Meanwhile, political life in Egypt moves on after a pledge to hold elections before the end of the year. News that opposition leader Mohamed El-Baradei is the new vice president in charge of foreign policy, while a former banker and finance minister, Hazem El-Beblawi, gets the nod as prime minister. Now, this breakthrough of an impasse, you might say, came thanks to the Salafist Al-Noor party, which earlier in the day approved the army-backed timetable for change, which was meted out overnight. That means Islamists are still on board, and if those elections take place as promised, what will the military do if, for instance, Islamists, be they Salafists or the Muslim Brotherhood, go ahead and win again? And while regional players, Turkey and Qatar, condemned Monday's bloodbath, now come reports Saudi Arabia with a $5 billion pledge. This on the day that the UAE's foreign minister showed up with a $3 billion pledge for Egypt. Yes, the region squarely divided, and on the future, both on Egypt itself and on the future of where political Islam is going. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what the future holds now for political Islam. Our guests from Cairo, Amr Darag, senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Joining us here in the studio, she's the author of An Islam of the Heart, Mira Daridan. Thank you for being with us. From Istanbul, we're going to be joined shortly by Meir Zenilov, journalist for Turkish daily Today Zaman. And from Tel Aviv, we expect to hear shortly from Israeli-Iranian political scientist Meir Javandanfar of the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. Now, before we go to our panel, let's go to Cairo and France 24's Catherine Stapley. Catherine, another day of fast-brewing developments. The army has the Salafists on board, thus the announcement that we heard of the naming of a prime minister, of the fact that Mohamed El-Baradei is in that government. At what price did this breakthrough come?
Well, I think what we've seen here is certainly it's a very fragile alliance between the Salafi and Noor party and the army. I mean, we've seen flip-flopping back and forth. Yesterday, they withdrew from the political process in protest at the deaths of all of the people in front of the Republican Guard headquarters. 50 people died in the early hours of Monday morning, and they withdrew from the process in protest. But now they're saying that they're back on board. And, you know, the Salafi and Noor seem to be playing the role of kingmaker here. It's really them who have decided, vetoing and non-vetoing, who should be the interim prime minister. A couple of days ago, it was a done deal that Mohamed El-Baradei would be taking that role. And then it was them that said, no, that would be a slap in the face to the Islamists. He's too prominent an opposition figure here, and we don't want him. Now, that happened again with a second candidate, but now it seems they've accepted Hazem Beblawi as the new interim prime minister. But I'm sure that there is going to be some kind of... They've got their eye to the main chance here. They're going to want something in return. I mean, if we look at their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood under Morsi's presidency, you know, gradually that rift grew. And they were the only Islamist group who called for Mohamed Morsi to step down and called for early elections, although their supporters did not take to the streets on June the 30th. But they have got their eye to the main chance here. One of the big beefs that they had with Mohamed Morsi's government was the fact that they never got any ministerial posts, despite the Salafis en masse getting 25% of the parliamentary seats in elections. So I think maybe that's what they're going to be hanging out for this time in this new interim government.
All right, so Al-Noor, it seems for the time being, as we speak, ready to play electoral politics under the new rules. I see, Catherine, once again, that it's a sparse turnout behind you there on Tahrir Square, but across town, another huge turnout by the Muslim Brotherhood's faithful. What's the plan generally for the Muslim Brotherhood at this point?
Well, it's quite clear that they're not prepared to back down. You know, for them, they want to bring their supporters out into the streets and en masse to say that for us, still Mohamed Morsi is still our president, and they want to put pressure on the army. And we've seen this increasingly bloody showdown between the army and the Muslim Brotherhood, with the deaths, as I mentioned, at the Republican Guard headquarters. And they also, I mean, we can't discount the Muslim Brotherhood from the political process here. They still have an awful lot of grassroots support, and two, you know, that they are the most organized and unified political machine that there is here in Egypt. Still, the opposition are still quite divided. Now, the interim president and also the army and the opposition have called on the Muslim Brotherhood to be part of the political process, to part of this roadmap. They're categorically refusing to do so. They say that they don't want to be negotiating with what they call a usurper regime who've staged a military coup. So will they come out into any elections and take part in that? What seems to be happening too here is they're very cornered into these demonstrations. They're surrounded by the army up there. Their main public face, their headquarters across the country, the Freedom and Justice Party, their political wing headquarters, they've been damaged. Also, their television channel, Masr 25, has been closed, and many of their leaders have been arrested, or there are warrants out after them. So what will they do here? Really, they're trying to regroup, decide what they're going to do, but what it looks like at the moment is they're staying out in the streets to put pressure on the army.
Catherine Stapley, thanks again for that update from Cairo, setting the scene of what the situation is there. And again, as we were saying, the whole world watching a nation that's home to 1/4 of the planet's Arab population, I should say. First, Amr Darag, what's your reaction to the toing and froing of the Salafist Al-Noor party and the fact that they've given at least a tacit endorsement to the naming of this prime minister?
Well, thank you very much. Before I answer that question, let me just clarify a couple of points. The gatherings that you are seeing now that your correspondent referred to do not just belong to the Muslim Brotherhood. We are having millions in the streets right now protesting the aggression on the democratic process. So these rallies, although organized by the Muslim Brotherhood and includes a lot of members of the Muslim Brotherhood, but they include a diversity of people, of the Egyptian people, who are really intrigued by the fact that their democracy is being stolen away from them, even though they may not be supporting President Morsi. They may be opponents to President Morsi, but they are definitely supporting democracy. So what we are having today and the day before and every day afterwards will be rallies going on and on to restore the democratic path in Egypt. This is very important to realize. Then if we acknowledge the fact that what happened in Egypt is a military coup, and that coup actually is favoring some of the political forces that did not really do well in all the elections that took place over the last 2 years, and they are ignoring all of the forces that really did well in the elections. So in addition to being a military in nature, this coup is actually making use of the minority in order to justify and give themselves some sort of legitimacy.
And Amr Darag, what's your reaction to the news we're getting today of a $5 billion pledge from Saudi Arabia and a $3 billion pledge from the United Arab Emirates, whose foreign minister was in Cairo today?
Well, actually, these news do not really need any comment. I mean, it's very clear that that support of these countries, although we really do appreciate our historical relationship with these two countries, but obviously they are supporting the steps that were taken against democracy, and they are starting to support the new regime. This is something that's, of course, not really welcomed will
And
not
why
be
do you,
welcomed by most of them.
if that is the case, why do you think it is?
Well, you have to ask them about that. I mean, Egypt has been in a difficult situation economically for the last 2 years. And actually, that was not only at the time of President Morsi. That was before that, and during the time that the military council was in charge. Nevertheless, we never got these kinds of support. But if you find that this support is coming a couple of days after President Morsi is ousted, you don't really need much of intelligence to realize the motives behind them. About your question about the Noor Party, actually the forces that made use of that coup are trying to give themselves some popular support, because as you said in your report, the Noor Party got more than 20% of the support of Egyptians in last elections. So they would like to gain a wider support among Egyptians. But actually, according to a Noor Party statements, this is not just the issue of the name of the prime minister. It is also related to the path that the process is going to take. It is related.
Let's pick up on that issue of the path of where it's going to take. Mira Daridan, one of the demands of the Al Noor Party is to keep some of the language that's in the current constitution regarding Islamic law,
which is the case in the current constitutional declaration that's been made. And it actually jumped into number 1 of the Declaration of Constitution, rather than number 2 and number 240 something. I would like just to comment on what Mr. Darag just said. You cannot have double standards. If you consider that the people who are in the streets right now, the Muslim Brotherhood supporters, are representing a democratic process, then you have to recognize that the 30 million people who were in the Tamarrud movement were also democratic. So you cannot have double standards by just discrediting these millions of people who are calling for a change.
But as our correspondent Catherine Stapley said, the Muslim Brotherhood, well organized, they fared well. As Mr. Darag said, the Al Noor Party fared fairly well. They did surprise second when they had the elections for the Constituent Assembly. If an election were to take place for the next legislative elections, what will the military do if the Islamists win again?
Well, if the Islamists are behaving, and more specifically, the Muslim Brotherhood are behaving as they have been behaving this last week, people will not vote for them. Because, I mean, the violence that we saw in Alexandria, people being thrown from upwards the buildings, children being thrown away from building tops, it is absolutely unacceptable. The Egyptian man and woman is before anything religious by definition, but not Muslim Brotherhood, not necessarily Muslim Brotherhood, and they are very affectionate. You show them pictures like that and they will react. This is why, and I'm sure Mr. Darag is right by saying some people are today with them in the streets, not because they are Muslim Brotherhood, they will not vote for them, but just because 50 people died. Now, the 50 people who died also, there is an inquest ongoing on who shot first. And the pictures that we see on television show us people that look like Muslim Brotherhood that were armed. You don't go in front of army
let's
barracks.
Not go back to that issue
with arms.
Right now. But there's also a lot of people who are very wary of the military and acting, picking up their old habits. We have a tweet from Save Misr saying the future of political Islam, according to coup supporters of Tahrir, is simple: submit to oppression or die. I want to pick up on one of the points we just discussed with Amr Darag, with Meyer Javan Danfar, who now can join us from Tel Aviv. Thanks for being with us, Meyer. The issue of the money, the huge amounts of money that were pledged this Tuesday. $5 billion by Saudi Arabia, another $3 billion by the United Arab Emirates. Amr Darag saying we could have used that money for quite a while.
That's actually very true, Francois. I think the issue here is it's not just the money. It's just what side United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia want to be on. we have to focus on the question of democracy here. I'm not a fan of Muslim Brotherhood. I would say the same things if the same had happened to some secularist party in Egypt. But I think what happened in Egypt was an assault against democracy. And as we can see now, basically, those who did it are now being sponsored by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. I've also heard of reports now. I hope
and why is that in your view? Why is that in your view?
Because of their own geostrategic interests, they were worried about Morsi was becoming closer to some Salafist groups for example, in Syria, and he was distancing himself from the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi point of view. And I think, again, for the future security of this region, I think what the UAE and Saudi Arabia did, the steps they took could be dangerous, because this could send a message to any army in this region that as long as the Saudis and the UAE are against the government in charge, they can basically take over, and then afterwards they will be sponsored and get economic aid from these two countries. We want to have democracy in this region. We want to give a voice to everybody, including the poor and the religious who have been marginalized. And and I think the way, if the Saudis and the UAE, if they're interested in democracy, and that's a if with a capital I think what they're doing runs contrary to that, because what happened in Egypt was a coup d'etat. And I think the world should take a very strong step towards making sure that the next elections includes everybody and that Muslim Brotherhood is given a fair chance to run. Otherwise, we're not going to see stability in Egypt, which is against the interest of everybody, including us in Israel.
All right, and on the subject of Riyadh, an article by the Wall Street Journal's correspondent in the Saudi capital, it's described how it's been a good run for Saudi Arabia the past few days. There's their man Ahmad Jarba, who's been picked to head the Syrian opposition, while in Egypt, King Abdullah rushing to be the first, quote, to offer congratulations after the ouster of Morsi. In an effusive telegram, Ellen Nickmeyer writes, to Egyptian Defense Minister Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the Saudi king reached out figuratively, firmly shaking the hand that had saved Egypt from a tunnel whose extent and outcome only God knows. That's a quote from the Saudi state press agency. We're going to get more reactions on how the regional players are looking at Egypt when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.